And there you go. So welcome. This is the second in a series of 3 currently planned events. Today, we're going to focus on M&A and what we call life after the deal. We have a next event on May 31st. That is going to focus on governance and succession planning for private businesses. So we have another admit, please, Devin. So I always like to open up with ownership strategy because that's the foundation of everything. For people who own the business is an asset. It's not a child, it's an asset that you should use to enhance your life. And we start from there. And there's really four questions to think about as far as what is an ownership strategy. And I distinguish an ownership strategy from the business strategy. The business strategy is how do we grow our business, what markets are we in, what products do we sell. The ownership strategy has more about how do you want to live your life and how does the business help you get there. So it's literally, how do you want to live your life? Do you want to work 800 hours a week or not? We're getting some feedback. Could someone please put their self on mute, please? Thank you. Second is, what does financial security mean to you? How do you want to live? It's where we talk about what we call the 3% rule. We have a couple financial planners on here, and they know the story of, as a rule of thumb, with certain assumptions, you can withdraw 3% of a portfolio every year and not really diminish the portfolio. So if your portfolio is big enough, you can live off that, and lots of people do. That gets back to how big does your business have to be when you sell it? Third question is, what do you want your business legacy to be? It's also colloquially, what do you want written on your tombstone? And do you care if anyone comes to your funeral or not? It's what is your reputation and what do you care about it? There are people who literally just don't care. They do what they want to do. But history has shown that as you get older in life or in your later years, as you spend more time looking back on life than forward, you get haunted by things that you coulda, shoulda, woulda. So as you think about how you manage your business and how you deport yourself, your business legacy is important. And the fourth point is, well, what about the people who made you successful? If you grew a great business, you didn't do it alone. Even if you're a musician or a tennis player or a golfer, you have coaches, staffs, caddies who help make you successful. Life is a team sport at the end of the day. So your ownership strategy has to be, where do you stand on these issues? And I certainly will not, my value system is different from your value system. That's fine. You just need to be honest with yourself about how do I answer these things? Because it becomes foundational for everything else. So when you think about that, we then move to business strategy. I want to grow my business. How do I do it? In most industries, there's a finite growth rate of the industry. If you want to grow faster, then acquisitions are really the tool to use. I know we have a number of folks on this call who are professionals in the M&A world. What I've found is a couple things to keep in mind, and this is what I always coach my clients with. One is you need to have very clear and specific goals. Why am I doing this acquisition? What do I accomplish by it? And that becomes your North Star, because as you go through the process, there'll be ups and downs, there'll be decision points. All hell breaks loose at a couple of times. And you need something to keep you on track, because otherwise it's easy to be deflected into unproductive ways. Second point is, you're managing a process. You need to manage it proactively. It doesn't just kind of happen. Like many things in business and in life, think of it as a process, not an event. In order to manage a process, somebody needs to be in charge of the deal. It usually winds up being the attorney for either the buyer or seller. Can't be both. Those two dogs got to do some tail sniffing to kind of figure out who's going to do it. And that kind of determines how the deal gets done. If the person running the deal isn't on their game, it makes it very difficult. And so as the owner, who presumably is selling the business, you want to make sure that that quarterback is running a good deal. It also minimizes running the meter for attorney's fees that you'd rather not pay. Get a good deal done. Not get a perfect deal done, get a good deal done. Perfection is the enemy of the good. One of the common phrases is, it's a good deal when everyone walks away just a little bit unhappy. It's about the art of compromise. And if you talk to people who do lots and lots of transactions, they'll usually say somewhere in there. If you can get a better deal or a perfect deal, that's wonderful, but that's not where you should set your expectations. It should be on, let's get a good deal done that I can live with. I know I'm not going to get everything. And so how you think about your negotiating capital for what you trade on a deal becomes very important as you go into a situation. I mentioned before that life is a team sport. Understand your position players as you're running a process. It's certainly the investment bankers or brokers and the attorneys. There's usually the accountants come in either to get your books and records good, or if you need a quality of earnings report, which could be buy side or sell side. And in some industries, there are industry specific consultants that you will need to get the deal done. So kind of think about that as you're coming into the decision process, and you want to have the right people. They're all professionals. They should play well in the sandbox. Sometimes they don't need to have a talking to, but you think about managing a team, just like in baseball. And always, let's talk about the post-close reality. There's a thought with first-time sellers of, hey, we're going to get the closing table. I'm going to get this wire transfer of lots of money, and then everything's going to be great. It never works that way. A really good closing is extraordinarily uneventful and boring, like, oh, we're closed. So what? More importantly, that's a sign of success, not a failure. If there's fireworks at the closing table, somebody did something wrong. More importantly, if it's a strategic acquisition, then it's going to be about how do we integrate the company I'm selling into this larger company? Like, how do we, who's running sales? Who's the face to the customer? What about accounting? Which CRM are we using? What production planning are we using? That's complete mayhem. As the seller, you want to work through that long before the closing table, because you probably have obligations to run the business for a while, and that just becomes a bad experience. I'm trying not to use an explicative. That just becomes a really bad situation that makes your life really unpleasant. You want to figure that out before the deal closes. So as you're doing the last 60, 90 days of diligence, the lawyers are gearing up, you want to at least have an outline of that. You need to set expectations. If it's a private equity deal, if you're the platform, it's just who's the management team. If you're the bolt-on, this is very important. Certainly if you're concerned about your staff, because if you're the bolt-on, a lot of them probably aren't going to be there. So those are kind of the things to think about in the sale process. Let's give some quick case studies about some recent situations I've had. So one case we closed in January. It's a $30 million specialty machine shop. Got a third generation. The owner is 47 years old, thinking, hey, I got a 12-year-old son. Wouldn't it be great to give the business to him? He got an unexpected offer from a public company for $75 million, 100% cash. It's like, what do I do with this? He had never thought about it. So we actually worked through this process. We started with identifying clear goals, and he was really about, if I can create generational wealth for my family, and I know that all my guys are okay, and that I have flexibility to do what I want, then I would sell the business. He had no reason to sell the business. It was perfectly healthy. He was healthy. He was having fun. He had a phenomenal team. So we worked through a process of about 6 months of understanding the pros and cons, working with a large public company. We had some issues with some of their staff. We went through all of that, and really only at the 11th hour, he said, okay, I'll sell. That one worked well. Another one I'm working on now, hopefully we close this Friday. It's a $35 million term sheet. Ironman triathlete CEO, but he's got little kids. He wants to spend more time with his kids. So how do we do that? And we spent about 6 months, worked through what his options were in the marketplace, and found out if we split his business in two, We can sell half of it because it was an active market. He can keep the rest. He'll have financial security. He'll get the time with his kids, and he can then go do whatever he wants with the rest of the business. So there's some examples of that. Let's move the conversation forward a little bit. Talk about life after the deal. Most private company owners spend their whole life working. You probably have friends or neighbors where maybe it was the family business, maybe the guy started a business early in career, he runs it his whole life, and time comes to exit, whether it's retirement or selling it. The thought is, I'll get a big pile of money and go to the beach and play golf, life will be good. It actually doesn't work that way. We sold our business. I was 36 when we sold it. I left when I was 39. Figured I'd go get another job. I never actually did. What I experienced, I have found out, is common to people who have where you identify as your business or your job. You lose your identity. You're actually a human being. You're not a job title. You lose your sense of purpose because when you're so jazzed up about going to work in the morning and then you stop going, what do you do for 6 or 8 hours a week? Everyone knows you as the CEO of, Acme Rivet or whatever. That causes a sense of feeling adrift. My anchor, everything about how I run my life, it's all topsy-turvy. And the last one is an uncomfortable differentness. Things are different, I'm uncomfortable. Nothing's wrong. I'm safe, I got a plan, but it just doesn't feel okay. And having spoken with dozens of people who've gone through it, there's a natural transition process here, and you need to wrestle with these things. So what I
good, thanks.
So what I advise clients is, you're going to experience all those things, but let's have an action plan, because the goal is to have no regrets. Have a great career, sell your business, get the pile of money, and then go on to have a great life. In the action movies, it's stop the bad guy and save the girl, they say. So have a clear purpose. What do I want to do with my life? If you want to get your handicap as low as Rusty Magner, you can do that. If you want to devote yourself to charity, that's wonderful. If you want to just travel the world, if you want to do nothing, I know a guy who did that also. Any answer is okay as long as it's the right answer for you and you have conviction in it. Certainly manage your financial security. You only sell your business once. You need to make it last. For serial entrepreneurs who are going to, build a business, sell it, start another one, sell it, okay. But for most people, they get one big exit event. Definitely invest in family and friends, because happiness depends on relationships. There's lots of scientific studies on that. Your social fabric gets disrupted when you sell your business. Most of your social hours are in the workplace. Suppliers, vendors, your team, you're not the boss anymore. You no longer have that relevant. And your friends and neighbors that you only see on the weekend, they're not gonna, they're not changing their lives. And the biggest issue is, for better or worse or not, for lunch. As typically, the husband was out working 80 hours a week, the wife raised the children in a traditional household. She has her own life. She's not giving up her girlfriends and her card game because you retired. It just doesn't happen. In a conversation last week, this came up, and the wife said, we could either shoot you or get divorced. He decided to go back to work. So that leads to, you need to get a new social structure, whatever that may be. And lastly, you need to manage your time proactively so your time doesn't manage you. Time will continue to go by. You don't want to be 3-4 years down the road and say, what am I doing? Because that would just be a waste. So with that, those are my comments. We have a bunch of M&A deal guys on this call. We have a number of wealth managers, a number of business owners. Mike, I don't know if you have any stories on deals where Mike's a brokerage businesses. If you'd be willing to share a couple of stories of what you've seen of people have sold their businesses and what the sale process is like, and comments about how to make a sale process more effective.
Thank you, Bruce. I think the one comment I would make is what I do when I teach in a class, that I never sell to number one buyer. And everybody says, what are you talking about? It gets the attention. And my point there is that we focus on the number two buyer, where the fit between the owner and the buyer is there, the fit between the culture of the selling organization and the buying organization is there, and that the vision is there. So when we combine all of those things, we find that the delta between 1 and 2 in terms of the economics is very small. And so that's what I've been doing for 30 out of my 35 years. The first 5 years, I didn't know some of these things. So yeah, that's been one of my forte, strength, expectations, and delivery to my clients. And they don't like, some of them don't like to hear that. They just want to see the money, and then they regret afterwards.
Right. Thanks, Mike. We also have John Hendricks from Piper Sandler, works in insurance, if my memory's right. John, you've sold a business or two along the way. Any comments you'd like to share from your point of view?
Yeah, well, thanks, Bruce. Appreciate being included, and I apologize for being late. I was having trouble kind of navigating my way into the conference. You know, I think your comments, Bruce, around the psychology of this is very, very important. And I agree with Mike that most of the time, the delta between your best bid and your next bid is not that significant, tends to be less than 5%. And when it is that small, getting the fit right is, I think vitally important. You know, the other thing I would say is that spending time with your buyer to really align on what the business is going to look like in the post-closing period. What is my role as current owner operator going to be, if any? And what are the expectations that each side has for a successful transaction? All of those, none of those things are legal obligations, but in a good situation, they're very strong moral obligations that both sides have. And sometimes we see clients will write these things down, put them in a side letter. Again, doesn't have any legal enforceability, but it does tend to get both sides thinking about what each of them views as being a success. And in a good transaction, you never have to look at that letter again, but everybody remembers what they agreed to, and everybody's working on the same things. And those, you know, the money's going to be the money, but having the right kind of counterparty that respects your goals, respects your people, and respects your organization, those are all really critical things. And like I said, I think Mike really hit a very important series of points there.
Great. So I'm going to turn to Rusty Magner for one last piece on M&A. Rusty did me a number of favors about learning about reps and warranties insurance and how it's used in the deal process. And in a couple of deals since then, we found that we could change the structure of the purchase agreement because we have the reps and warranty insurance, the escrows, the baskets, the caps, all that complexity. We could just avoid, because we can agree on we're going to get a policy. Here's how the policy pays out. We'd split the cost, and it just made doing deals easier. So, Rusty, I know you're more on the benefit side, but your organization does a lot in reps and warranties. If you got any comments here to share with the crowd?
Yeah, Bruce, as you know, and everybody knows, every deal is different. So it depends on many, many factors. But and is the reps and warranties insurance affordable? Is it something you want to factor into the price, both parties? So there's a lot of things to consider, but you're absolutely right. If it is affordable and structured properly, it can be a big plus for everybody involved, just to kind of take some worry off the table on both sides, to make sure that, you know, to avoid those surprises at transaction and post transaction.
And your primary work is on the benefit side. So as you've had clients who have sold their businesses, what do you normally see about how benefits get managed? How do they get examined? What should owners be thinking about if they're thinking about a process, and like, where do benefits fit in the diligence process? And how do you avoid a last minute surprise because the benefit plan is screwed up?
Bruce, that's a good question. And it's very timely because I've got a meeting tomorrow with one of my clients who's in the middle of an acquisition right now, excuse me, late stages of an acquisition. And the owner's spouse has some cancer and it's, very expensive. And how does that play into the cost of their health plan going forward? So they're concerned from a cost standpoint on the health plan. Now you've got this person coming on the plan who we know is going to be a high claimant and going to drive up costs for everybody on the plan. And so just understanding what the responsibilities are there and the fact that it's an asset purchase and not all the employees are transitioning over to the buying company. There's no health plan to keep going forward to put that person on COBRA or something like that. So they do have to come over to the buyer's health plan. So yeah, we're not excited about that, but talking about perhaps adjusting the purchase price to take on this liability now that this buyer's got to take.
Great, thanks. So we're going to shift gears and move to the life after the deal comment. And if Anna Nichols could hear me, she's been advising families in complex business owning families for a long time and has seen her share of war stories. You've, and in your current capacity, you both advise families and manage their wealth after a liquidity event. Can you kind of share your point of view about what you've seen people go through and any advice on how to make the transition from being a operating family to a financial family?
Sure. So our firm does do the management of the assets, and I kind of come in on more of sort of the family education, family guidance side of things. A couple of things while I was looking at your slide, Bruce, I thought was interesting. One thing we've kind of found over time, and some of you have probably heard this before, is what's interesting. A lot of times we'll talk to people who own and run their own business, and we'll say to them, if they're thinking about selling the business, they're thinking about making this transition. Well, tell me a little bit about tell me all your different social circles. Tell me the communities you're involved with. And they kind of sit there and it's really quiet for a minute. And, they can't, they don't have a lot of time. They haven't taken the time. Everything's gone into the business and they haven't taken the time to really build out different sort of networks and social circles in their life. And I think it's great if you can realize that before you go through this and think about what are you going to do? How's your social life going to be? Because it can be pretty daunting emotionally for owners who've spent their whole life building up this business. The life has been about their business. Their friends are all in there, but it's all kind of been centered on this one thing. To give that up, and then make a change can be really daunting for people, and they can do it. But I think it helps if you have that realization ahead of time that maybe I need to start building these out 2 years in advance, or maybe I need to start thinking about this a little bit before the sale, because the sale itself, as can be kind of all consuming once that gets going.
Absolutely.
So that's one thing we want people to think about. The other thing for families, when it's a family business, a business, no matter what kind of business it is, it's a great thing for the family to rally around, right? It sort of brings everybody together, and they've got these employees, and maybe they have this place in the community, and they've got these tangible things possibly that the family business itself made and did, and their names on stuff. It's really hard to bring people together around money in the same way. It's just hard. So I think you have to think about what is our family going to be together? How are we going to be together afterwards, after the sale? Do we want to be together? And if so, what do we want to do together? Maybe that's, in part, maybe it's some sort of philanthropy, but, think about, you've always existed as a family group in a certain way. How are you going to exist as a family group after that sale? And it gets even trickier if you're in the third generation or beyond, because it's one thing if I have my mom and dad and my siblings, we kind of already exist together anyway, even if we're adults. We grew up together, we're around the kitchen table together, things like that. It's when you've got cousins that gets to feel more sort of separate. So I think that's, an important conversation. Then if you want to stay together as a group with shared assets, and, shared assets can be invested to do better. So it can be somewhat financially better. If you want to remain in a state of shared ownership of shared assets, what's going to be kind of your centralized thing that brings the family together. And it's got to be something else just besides a portfolio. It needs to be some sort of mission or, something that you're doing together as a family, ideally.
Thanks. So Dick Leopold, I'm going to cue you up if you're willing to. So I've known Dick for longer than he would like to admit. He took over a business his dad started, grew it to become quite successful, sold it, started another business, I believe sold that, and now is on the third one. He's been on this journey a few times, and that silver hair is a sign of his wisdom. So, Dick, if you've got some comments to share about moving through the sale process, the emotions and things you did to successfully move forward, now would be a great time to share.
I wanted to offer one idea to the crowd because there's an interesting transition on the day of the sale. I sold 2 businesses, and on that day, every one of my employees got fired. And the next day they were employed by someone else. And that transition was more challenging than I knew going in. There were new health insurances to put in place. There were separation agreements that had to be honored. And some of them were expensive in a way that wasn't part of the deal. And that was odd. And so that's the one that I would leave on the table for this crowd, which is watch that transition for the employees, because it can make the deal bumpier. Rusty says yes.
Well, if Rusty says yes, it has to be.
So that's my advice.
Yeah, I was going to agree 100% with your comments. It's about the employees and making sure they're comfortable and they're kind of communicated all along that. And so it's not just popped on them about what's happening. And you're right. How do the benefits compare, and providing good information about the new benefits and making people feel comfortable about the benefits. Huge.
Thanks. Any other comments you want to share, Dick?
No, just that was the one that struck my mind. There's so many different reasons to sell a business. And everyone has a different story and a different need. Anna's thought that you have to pay attention to what people are trying to accomplish is really very important.
Thanks. And Mark Taylor, I think down in Delray Beach, you work both in the wealth management business. You're also involved in the transaction world. So a somewhat similar view as Anna's, but you do more on the transaction side. Any comments you want to share in your experience of the deals that you've seen and life after the deal for the owners?
It's interesting because in the first part of my career, I saw the money after the transaction. Now I'm seeing the planning before the transaction and the importance of the estate planning, gift tax planning, the risk management, the asset protection planning and so forth. So it's interesting to see how that process unfolds and the importance of going about that process. I think that most of the transactions I'm seeing, the business owner really has some sense of value, but the sense of value that they have, oftentimes there's a big disconnect between what they think the company is going to be worth when it sells versus what it is post-transaction. And the importance of aligning the financial success of the transactions so that they know the 3% rule, which I remember when it used to be the 5% rule, that monetization of the business, is there going to be sufficient assets going forward for them to, get through not only their generation, but the multi-generation transfer. And then the other part of it, I would say, is many of the transactions I'm seeing, basically you're setting up a virtual family office structure for the business post-transaction. So they're going from an operating company to a financial if you will, business? And do they have sufficient, advisory around them for all the multitude of services that they're going to need? Because oftentimes when they leave the business, they lose all of that support from the CFO, the COO, the HR people, and so forth. And what's their support group, if you will? So we've spent quite a bit of time trying to develop the virtual family office type of structure with business sales. But if it's a big enough family, are they sufficiently large for a single family office structure? And what does it really cost to run a single family office? And I think a lot of folks are
About $250 million of capital. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you can't afford it.
And if anybody's ever interested, we've developed a compensation study on setting up a family office and what each line item of employee within the family office, what the by geography, it's a little different price point down in Florida than it is in New York than it is in LA. But if anybody's ever interested in what the price of family office services are, that's something that we are often asked to offer up to clients that are post-transaction considering whether to set up a family office or not.
Great. One last question. Michael Weiss, thanks for joining us. If you can hear me okay, you've done a deal or two in your time. Any thoughts to share on how to get a good deal done or advice for owners as they move to the next stage of life after selling?
I think the other participants have touched on it, is surround yourself by good people and good advisors. I'm probably stating the obvious. A good financial planner, a good accountant, good lawyers, that's self-serving. And I have found that my clients that have had the most successful exits have really built a team, a coalition, a consortium, whatever you want to call it, of experts in advising them of what they want to do next, whether it's buy another business, invest, become charitable, or continue being charitable in philanthropy, but just get the advice and really realize, as I think Mark touched on it, you're entering a different stage now. You're not operating the business that was your baby for a long time, but you're going into a new phase. And I think the people that are successful at that new phase embrace it, learning, it's not starting over. And many of us, and we all know that have exited businesses, many clients have gone on to bigger and better things, whatever that is, whether it's buying another business and creating it, becoming, part of another business. But get advice and, get a team. And I have had clients set up family offices afterwards and quasi family offices, and they just didn't like being investors. They felt like I need to get back into it. I need to either work for an organization, become part of it, because they didn't care about the stock market or the bond market or evaluating other investments, and they just got into it. So consider all options, get a lot of advice, build your team. That would be my thoughts.
Thank you. To support your statement, I mentioned a deal we closed in January for $75 million. A week after the deal closed, the seller called me. He was completely happy with the deal. He said, I went out and bought a building so I can go touch something. I didn't like having all my money in electronic bits. I need to be able to walk in and know that I actually own a thing. So that's very much true. So we are about at the time. Let's do one more time around the horn. If anyone's got last minute questions, comments, thoughts, raise your real or digital hand and we'll go around the horn. Anyone? Bueller? Ben, did you have a question?
No, thanks. Thanks, Bruce. I just enjoyed listening to the conversation for the first time with this group, and appreciate everyone's insights.
Thank you. So our next event is May 31st. We'll talk about governance and succession planning. If you got any questions, I think you know how to get a hold of me. There is a recording that will be available. I appreciate your time. Want to thank Devin for production, and have a great day.